What's up, world? Thanks for jumping in for another ride. Today, we're going to be doing a coolant flush on the 2018 Ford Edge Sport. So the 2018 Ford Edge Sport has got about 37,000 miles on it, something like that, and it's never had a coolant flush at this point, and it was actually equipped with the original orange Motorcraft or factory Ford coolant, and so we're going to be swapping over to the yellow coolant. And so really quick, what I have picked up to get this job done is just 3 gallons of distilled water, and I've actually picked up 2 gallons of the Motorcraft yellow coolant, and this is part number V as in Victor, C as in Charlie, -13-G. So part number VC-13-G for the yellow coolant. And I actually picked up 2 gallons of the concentrate, and then I still had a little bit, very little bit. And this was actually led from doing a coolant system flush on the 2016 Ford F-150. So I just thought since we had a little bit left, and this would probably be a good container to go ahead and do our 50-50 mix in. So I held on to this. So we'll go ahead and utilize that also. And the next thing that I picked up is this is the Motorcraft Premium Cooling System Flush. And I didn't use this on the 2016 F-150, and I really wish that I would have. And this is part number V as in Victor, C as in Charlie, -1. So VC-1 is the cooling system flush. And 100% transparency, I have never done a cooling system flush on a Ford Edge before. So I reached out to a buddy of mine that is actually a Ford tech and asked him if there was anything in particular that I needed to watch out for with this. And he said, nope, basically the same system as everything else. So just go ahead and go through the procedure as normal. So what I want to do is go ahead and give you the directions off of the cooling system flush real quick. And basically all this is add flush to cooling system with the old antifreeze coolant in it. So here's what I think I'm going to do. I think I'm going to take this in about 4 steps. So don't hold me exactly to this being 4 steps, but in my mind, I think it's about 4 steps. So first step is I am going to just go ahead and do a drain on the radiator and expansion tank. Just pull the petcock. And there's still obviously going to be some residual coolant inside of the engine block and the cylinder heads. And so at that point, I'm just going to refill it with some tap water and the flush. And then I'm going to do just like the instructions said. I'm going to run it for about 10 minutes. Make sure the thermostat opens. Make sure that everything cycles really well. At that point, I'm going to go ahead and drain the system. And then I'm probably going to go ahead and fill that system back up with tap water. I'm going to run it for another 10 minutes, and that is just to make sure that any of that residual coolant that was still in the engine block and the cylinder heads and the flushes in it, I'm going to go ahead and get that stuff diluted down and out of there as much as possible because, again, some of that coolant is probably still going to be moving around. It's going to be in the engine block, cylinder heads, whatever. So we're going to go ahead and drain it, top it off with this, run it, and then we're going to go ahead and put just straight water back in it, run it again, dilute all that stuff down, flush it out. So at that point, I'm kind of considering that step 3. And then after that, we'll go ahead and top it off with our 50-50 mix of the Motorcraft yellow and our distilled water. And that should get us pretty well good to go. And I know some of that tap water is still going to be in the engine block and the cylinder heads, but honestly, I don't think that's going to be enough to really be concerned about at that point. So I'm not overly concerned about just doing the flush with the tap water. I just really want to go back with the distilled water and the mixture once we know that that coolant is going to be staying in the system. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. That's the overall general process. So let's get this thing up in the air and get started. So first step in the process, we want to go ahead and remove the expansion tank cap so that we don't create a vacuum so that everything will drain out. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this cap. And we should be good to go there. And I'm actually going to set the cap off to the side. So looking at the front of the little Ford Edge, the petcock is going to be over to the driver's side, and you can see the lower valance here. And then as we go back, there is kind of this splash shield type of material here. There is going to be 5 perimeter bolts. And so I'm going to start by removing those bolts because the petcock should be somewhere up in that area. So we're going to go ahead and start removing that real quick and get that down out of our way. All right, so we have removed the 5 bolts that go up through this little valance right here, or I guess it's like a splash guard, and you can see kind of where we've removed them. And then on the bottom side, it just has one plastic push pin, and I'm just going to leave that pin there and basically just rotate this over to the side, and then hoping I can get an angle so that you can see this. Okay, so you can see, get the light at the right angle. You can see the drain right there on the bottom of the radiator. And there is a little space up above. And so basically just above that drain is going to be the drain cock valve. And so we're just going to need to turn that valve, and I'm going to grab a piece of hose that I can put on the bottom of that stem, that little drain. I'm going to put a piece of hose on there, and then what I may have to do, there is actually a tool made for that drain, and I don't have one. And then I have just grabbed a 3-gallon bucket. So let me grab the hose and see what we can do. Okay, so I had to grab a tripod for the camera, but I wanted to give you an idea of about the size of hose for this. That way you just have a general idea. And obviously this isn't going to be exact. There's a couple of inches up above this valance. So that's about a little over 7.25. And the inside diameter is probably somewhere around, right around 7/16 or so. This is actually off of my oil change kit for a Harley Davidson motorcycle. So this is the hose that goes on the little drip tray that you put down on the bottom of the frame to drain the oil and the filter. So that is the hose that I'm using on here. This is actually from a Harley oil change kit. So once I'm through with this, obviously I'll just clean it up and put it back with my kit, but that is what I'm using. So that kind of gives you a general idea of what you're going to need. Okay, so we are officially draining, and I'll put it on camera here in a second, but what I ended up using is a 3/8 ratchet with a long extension and a 19mm socket. If you're very gentle, you can just slide that 19mm over the shoulders of that drain, of the drain cock, and all you have to do is just loosen it, just maybe a half a turn or so. And we started getting fluid out, and I'm not gonna get carried away with trying to open it up all the way since I don't have the tool. I'm just going to take my time. I know I'm sacrificing some time in the trade-off, but I'm not worried about that. I'd rather do that than not damage the drain valve. So I'm just going to let this thing drain until it stops draining, and then we'll let it down and go ahead and top it back off. And I think what I'll do on that valance there hanging down, I don't know if you can see that or not, the valance hanging down there, I am just going to take and just put 1 or 2 bolts just up in there just to kind of hold it up in place, since I'm going to close that drain valve off and go ahead and top it off, let it run. And then all I have to do is loosen up a couple of bolts back out of it and be good to go for the flush. So I'm gonna let this drain out and go ahead and get this tightened back up, and we'll go ahead and do our first flush with some of the Motorcraft radiator flush, or the coolant system flush, and some water. Okay, so you can see that we are still dripping, and I'm just gonna leave it like that for a while, but here's what works. So you can see that extension and that ratchet, and then I'm gonna go up here, and I'm going to get there, and you can see that socket. So that should be a good solution without having the tool. Now with that, I'm going to be very careful as I loosen and tighten this thing, because I don't want to damage those shoulders, but there is a reason why there's a tool sold for this. So it'd probably make this much easier, but that was a quick solution. So a 19mm, an extension, and a ratchet. All right, on page 347 of the manual, we can see that the engine coolant system calls for 10.6 quarts. So we're going to run over to this little 3-gallon bucket, and you can see that we've got maybe a gallon there, just right at a gallon, something like that. So there is still quite a bit of coolant left up in that system, and you can see that we're just barely dripping there now. So I'm just going to go ahead and button this up enough so that we can get it down and go ahead and get it topped off with our flush and some tap water, and go ahead and let this thing run about 10-15 minutes, and then we'll go ahead and let that cool all the way down and give it one more flush and go ahead and top it back off. All right, I've got my chemical flush, and I have got my bucket cleaned out, and I just put the old coolant in an old windshield washer bottle and just marked on it with a Sharpie what it is so I can take it to the recycle center. So here is the flush. I'm gonna go in with that first. All right, there's all of our flush. And let's see if I can do this without making a huge mess. So we're definitely purging some air out of the system. So let's see how far it goes down. I think that's probably okay for now. I'm gonna grab the camera so you can see this. So you can see, I get a little closer here, you can see where our water line is there, and probably actually just barely above the max, and you can see a few bubbles still coming out. So other than that, I'm going to start this thing up, let it run, let the temperature cycle, and then we will go ahead and get all of the chemical flush out of the system. Let's fire it up. All right, so I got it started up, and I went ahead and set the heater all the way to max. And as you can see, we already have some of that old coolant moving through the system. So we're basically just going to let this thing run, let the thermostat open, let everything cycle through it. And other than that, we're going to let it cool all the way back off. We'll flush this stuff out, and then we're going to go back with the yellow coolant. And I'm thinking in the back of my mind, if I'm a little bit heavy on the yellow coolant, what I mean by that, let's say if it's not a perfect 50-50, but if it's more of a 55-45, something like that, whatever it is, on the coolant side, I'm totally okay with that, because obviously we just added probably what's close to a gallon plus our flush. So I'm going to probably err on the side of caution and go a little bit heavy on the coolant side versus the distilled water side, just because I know that that is already going to be diluted down, and I don't want to take any chances of not having enough coolant in the system versus water. So anyway, long story short, I'm going to let this thing run, see if we can get all the air purged out of the system, let everything cycle, let the flush chemical do its job, and then we'll get all that flush back out of the system. All right, so it's probably been close to 10 minutes, maybe not quite 10 minutes yet, but you can see that the shutters are still closed in front of the radiator, and we are inside the shop, so you know, it's not quite as hot in here. You can see that coolant is definitely not as orange as it was earlier, for one, and still see some foam and some air purging out of it. So I'm going to swing around here actually and check out the temperature gauge. Let's see what we got. Yeah. Okay, so we're still slightly down the temperature gauge, not quite to the middle. And again, these factory gauges aren't exactly super accurate. They're not exactly a, you know, like a manual race car gauge, and they do that on purpose, but just kind of monitoring for it. I would definitely like for the thermostat to open and the fans to maybe cycle once, but I do have the heater on, and so I have that turned all the way up, so I'm sure that is also pulling out some of the residual heat. So I'm gonna let this run maybe another 5 minutes or so. Hopefully I can get the thermostat to open and the fans to cycle, and then we will check back in and kind of see where we're at. That took a little longer than what I expected. So I guess it took a little over 15 minutes, maybe 17, 18 minutes. I didn't keep, you know, track exact, but probably 17, 18 minutes. But we did get the shutters to fully close, fan cycled, and I did have to crack the expansion tank open a little bit, as I mentioned earlier, and we got a good purge out of it. So that means the thermostat open, all the air is completely out of the system. And as you can see, I got a little bit over the max mark. So when I go back with the final fill, I'm going to want to pay attention to that. And for me personally, I always try to actually keep that just below that max level. And the reason why is living in the southern United States, or in particular Texas, anybody that has ever lived in that area knows that the summers can be absolutely brutal. And my logic is the more coolant capacity that I can carry, the better with the brutal summers that we have. So anyway, long story short, I am going to let this thing completely cool back down. So my goal is to get up in my office and get some work done that actually pays the bills. And then after that, once this thing is completely cooled off, I'm going to come back down late afternoon, and we'll go ahead and drain out what we can out of the radiator and put some fresh water in it, just tap water. And we're going to flush out all of the chemical that we can, all that chemical agent flush. And then we should be ready for our final fill. So we will see you in a couple hours. And that is where our coolant level is after we have set about 3 hours, something like that. So it's come down quite a bit. I think I actually had to run out to work a little bit, so quick wardrobe change, and I actually got a little bit of coolant on the front of the old raggedy t-shirt that I had on earlier. So I think it's been about 3 hours or so. So we've cooled off totally, got some work done, back in the shop after doing some run around, some work stuff that actually pays the bills. So we're back on this. We're going to go ahead and do our second drain with our chemical flush in it. And I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I think what I'm going to do is actually, since I have got 3 gallons of this distilled water, and I should have more than enough fluid now. That was one of my concerns, was would I have enough? So I think I'm going to go ahead and actually just put a gallon of the distilled water in there for our flush. That way I don't keep just introducing the tap water into it with, you know, chlorine and chemicals and anything like that that may introduce any sort of corrosion or contamination in the system. I know we did that on the first one. I'm not overly concerned about a little bit of it being in there, but just to be, you know, kind of err on the side of caution, I'm going to go ahead and stick with the distilled water for our second flush to get the chemical flush out of the system. So let's get this thing back up in the air and keep moving. Now, back to our makeshift tool here. All right. Again, that's all I'm going to open it because, well, I'd rather take time than take the chance of damaging that petcock since we don't have the appropriate tool. So we're going to let this drain and we'll get this thing closed back up and we'll get it topped off with some distilled water. All right, bear with me for a second. I know I'm shifting gears again. So I've kind of thought about something, and on that drain there was actually still a lot of the orange coolant in there. So what I did was actually grab a couple more gallons of clean water, and what I'm going to do is I just let the drain cock open down the bottom, and I'm just basically going to pour a couple of gallons of clean water through the system with it just like this, completely open, so we can try to flush some of that stuff out of there really quick. And again, I know that, you know, we use a chemical agent to clean the system out, so I want to make sure we can get as much of that stuff flushed out as we can. So here we go. I'm going to go ahead and add a couple of gallons to this, and we should hear it coming out at some point. Now, when? I couldn't guarantee you, but we're just going to keep going with this and try to get as much going through as possible. All right, so we went ahead and just ran 1 gallon of the water through it, and after a gallon, we're starting to get really clean water out of it. So no more of the orange coolant, so we're going to go ahead and just leave it at 1 gallon. And now we're going to go ahead and just top it off and do, you know, our final flush. So we get all the way up to operating temperature, thermostat opens. That should get any residual chemicals out of there. So I'm pretty happy with that. So let's keep moving, and we'll go ahead and get this thing sealed up on the bottom, get the drain cock closed, and then we'll go ahead and get our fluids in it, and we'll go ahead and, you know, just go ahead and run some fresh water through it. We should be good to go after that. And we'll put our 50-50 mix of Motorcraft yellow and some distilled water in. And we are back down to, we're a little faster than a drip for sure. So we got a lot of that water out of it, or I guess mixture of water and coolant and cleaning chemical. So you can see we've got a lot of foam on top. I would have to imagine that's from the cleaning chemical, because that definitely did not happen before. But you can see we're about halfway up on our bucket here, probably a little bit past halfway actually, and it's a 3-gallon bucket. So that is that. We're going to go ahead and get the drain cock closed back up. Just wanted to show you that definitely looks different than it did before. So we're going to get the drain closed back up, and we're going to go ahead and just take our splash guard again, put 2 bolts just started in it just to keep it in place, get our rubber hose out of the way, and go ahead and top it off and run it one more time to get everything circulated and start fresh. And we can see where our fluid level is, and we just went down a little. I'm sure as soon as the water pump fired up, so we can see a little bit of that orange coolant coming in there. Not a ton, definitely much lighter than what it was. The yellow coolant is really fantastic. It's backwards compatible with any of the older Motorcraft coolants, whether it's the orange or whatever it may be, even the green. So that's really what I like about the new yellow coolant, is it's backwards compatible. And for me personally, being a hot rod guy, and this having twin turbos on it, anything that's aspirated like this with turbos, or, you know, any sort of forced induction, I'm always a big proponent of using the absolute best, you know, oils and coolant capacity, that sort of stuff, all the supporting systems that you can possibly use. So I know this is probably completely overkill, and there's probably some technician out there telling me right now that you're doing it completely wrong. So again, I'll always say this every time I'm on this channel. I think I'm just a guy working out of a shop behind my house, so kind of doing the best that I can do here with what I got. So I think I'm going to be really happy with this flush, but we're going to go ahead and get the cap on it, make sure that this thing is safe so we don't get anything overflowing or any air pockets or anything. So I'll get the cap on it, and other than that, we're going to let this thing get up to operating temperature, let the thermostat open up, all that fun stuff. And again, we did top it off this time with distilled water. We used that one flush with just a regular city water or city tap water, and so we're back with the distilled water, making sure that we're keeping this thing, you know, all the components as clean that we can, and no opportunities for any component contamination or component corrosion, if you will. So I am going to get this cap on, and we'll check back once we're up to temperature. All right, so it's probably been just over 15 minutes, and we did get the shutters open, fan cycle, thermostat fully open. So That is that one, and that is what our coolant looks like now, and that is our level. So it's actually just after 7 p.m. So I'm gonna shut this thing down and go get some dinner, let this thing cool down all night long, and then in the morning, we should be ready to top it off with some fresh yellow Motorcraft coolant. All right, so it's the next morning. It's about 8:30, and actually started the day about 5:30. Straight up to the office, got some work done, came back down, and that is where our coolant settled from last night. So not a bad level. We'll obviously get it up a little bit higher than that once we do our final fill. But let's go ahead and get this thing raised up and go ahead and do our last flush on the coolant side, and we'll go ahead and get this thing topped off with our mixture of the yellow Motorcraft coolant. All right, let's get our hose back on. There's our hose. Grab our ratchet. There we go. We are on our drain valve. And there is what we got out of the cooling system. And you can see that there is much less foam in that liquid than there was before. And we're probably about the same as we was last time. I think we were just barely over half a bucket. So that would have been about 1.5 gallons or so, because like I said, it's a 3-gallon bucket. So I think we're just probably right under the 1.5 gallon mark at this point. And we probably just used a little bit less water for that last flush. Is the only reason why. And you can see we're just barely down to a fast drip. So I am going to get the bottom of this thing all put back together, buttoned up, and we'll go ahead and get this thing topped off with some Motorcraft yellow. So I'm just double checking to make sure, since this is our last time to top it off, that I get that drain valve completely closed off good. So I'm just making sure, since that's our last fill, I feel pretty good about where we're at. So let's get this thing buttoned all back up how it goes. I'm not gonna bottom them out, so I don't have to worry about lining everything up. I'll just get them in a few good turns. So my dad always said if he took it apart, he could put it back together. I think that was the truth, because I never seen him take apart anything that he couldn't put back together. So some of this stuff, don't be afraid to dive off into it. And it may not be the most time effective thing. And I know we live in a busy world now where, time is definitely a valuable resource. But you can get out in the garage, get out in your shop, get out in the driveway, and just start working with stuff. And here's the reality of it. If it's something that you run into a problem with, there's plenty of people out there that are good at what they do that can help you out to finish the job. And there's no shame in asking for help. So with that, again, time is the most valuable asset that we have. So while I'm putting this thing back together, please do me a favor and take a second, hit the thumbs up button, hit the subscribe button, and let's get this thing down and top it off. So just to get it started, I'm going to start with this one. And again, there's just a little bit down the bottom of it. You can see it's about somewhere right in there. So maybe like 1/10 gallon, something like that. But this is just what I had left over from the F-150. So in goes this small portion. All right, so up next, I'm going to use this, and you can see that it is maybe 1/4 gallon, something like that, maybe just over a quart, something like that, but we're not quite 1/2 gallon for sure. And then, so I'm just going to mix it with this. I'm going to mix them in the other container that I had, since it's empty. That way I can kind of look through the sight glass that's on the side of this jug, and I can kind of determine where I'm at as far as mixing it, because it does have the 1, 2, and 3 quarts, and then obviously up at the top is going to be 4. So I'm going to put this in and then go ahead and mix that on top of it. So I'm going to have a little more of the coolant concentrate than I am water. And again, that's on purpose, because I know I introduced some water into the engine block and cylinder head. So I know it's not an exact science. Okay, so our water, we are just below the 2-quart mark. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill this thing absolutely all the way up to the top with the coolant. And normally when you buy them, it's probably going to be somewhere about where that dot is, something like that. So we're going to fill this thing all the way up. So again, we're going heavy on the coolant. And there we go. We are literally all the way up to the very top. So let's get this going without me making a giant mess here. And we are topped off on our coolants, and you can see that we still have a little bit of that orange tint down at the very bottom. So man, that orange tint must be an absolute barrier to get out of there. But we've gone ahead and topped it off with our Motorcraft yellow mixture, and again, the yellow is backwards compatible, so no worries with going back, you know, on top of the orange or the green or anything like that. So the yellow is considered like the standard upgrade now for the Ford products. And you can see that our level, we are right at the max line. So we're going to get this thing pulled out of the shop and give it a drive and make sure that no issues, you know, we purge the system good, all that, no kind of weird overheating, no air pockets, anything like that. So let's get this thing pulled out and we'll go to drive. All right, so I have moved the Ford Edge over to the garage side from the shop behind the house. And you can see where our coolant level is. We're actually below the minimum, and we have a lot more prevalent of that yellow coolant now. So I'm going to go ahead and top it off again with just straight concentrate, since we did introduce that water into the system. And I'm about to hit the road for work, about a 60-mile trip over to Fort Worth. And once I get over to the Fort Worth area, I will check it again, and I'm actually going to go ahead and throw a gallon of coolant in the back of the car just to be on the safe side. Just my style, just how I kind of like to do things. So I'll have a gallon with me just in the catastrophic event. Shouldn't anything happen, but I'd rather have it with me than not. So when we get over to Fort Worth, we will check it again. All right, so we made the trip over to Fort Worth, and I actually purged the air out of the system, and so we were actually just below the minimum line, and you can see that we were over the max. So I just want to make sure that we were kind of staying in that level right there, or just at that max level, without having to add anything. So obviously we don't have to add anything, and that yellow color is much more prevalent now. The orange in that orange coolant is definitely tough to get out of the system, no doubt about it. So I think we are good to go with the coolant flush on the 2018 Ford Edge Sport. And there we have it. I think we had a pretty successful coolant flush on the 2018 Ford Edge Sport. I know it definitely wasn't the most time efficient way to do it, but it's just what we had available, and I think it worked out. And again, like I said at the beginning of this, I had never done a coolant flush on a Ford Edge, so it was a little bit of a learning experience, but it was definitely a fun experience, and I think we did an okay job at it. And so I hope you got some good information or ideas out of this video to help you out with your project, whatever it may be, or I just hope you enjoyed hanging out with us. So please do me a favor, hit the thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and as always, jump in for another ride. I gotta go to work.